Prime Minister Netanyahu is in a position where he will entertain a ceasefire with greater enthusiasm than in the past, because he's coming to that ceasefire from a very clear, demonstrated position of strength. Hamas has definitely been dismantled as a terrorist army. It is now a guerrilla terror force, but it is far from the terror army that it was. Regimes that do not have nuclear weapons capabilities, ultimately those regimes fall. In terms of how much more there is left to do against Hamas inside the Gaza Strip, in the context of the mooted ceasefire deal, which is distinct from an end of war pronouncement or proclamation, I think that the Israel Defense Forces is continuing to take the fight to Hamas. It's continuing to seize and hold territory inside the Gaza Strip, as it said that it would do in the event that Hamas remained recalcitrant when it came to the release of our hostages, that it still holds inside the dungeons of the Gaza Strip. But there does seem to be a groundswell here in Israel behind the idea that now might be the moment to strike a 60-day ceasefire deal that would see the release of 10 hostages during the course of that 60 days, and a further 18 dead hostages would also be returned to the state of Israel. And during that 60 days, there would also be a negotiation towards seeing whether or not an end to the war could be brought about. Now, there are different viewpoints within the state of Israel. There's a very interesting one that was reported here that was articulated by the Chief of the General Staff himself, Lieutenant General Eyal Zamir, during a war cabinet discussion. And I'm actually going to quote it to you. In that discussion, Lieutenant General Zamir was said to express that, quote, Hamas is a dead organization. During the war against Iran, Zamir went on to say, Hamas did absolutely nothing beyond firing one rocket from the Gaza Strip toward Israel. He said that the hostages and their release are currently the most important issue. And he also went on to express to the ministers present at this meeting that it is possible to conquer the entirety of the Gaza Strip, but that entails endangering the lives of the hostages. And I think that Prime Minister Netanyahu is in a position where he will entertain a ceasefire with greater enthusiasm than in the past, because he's coming to that ceasefire from a very clear, demonstrated position of strength. He's laid waste to Hezbollah's capabilities in southern Lebanon. He has massively damaged Iran's nuclear weapons program inside Iran on sovereign Iranian territory. Hamas has definitely been dismantled as a terrorist army. It is now a guerrilla terror force, but it is far from the terror army that it was prior to October 7th and Israel's response to the massacre that was wrought against us by Hamas. And so Prime Minister Netanyahu may be able to say that he now wants to reprioritize bringing out the hostages, something that has clearly been towards the top of his daily agenda since October the 7th. Despite what the media says, I believe the Prime Minister is very dedicated to bringing the hostages home. He may be willing to do that which is needed in order to bring about that outcome to the fullest extent that he can, precisely because he comes to these negotiations from a position of strength. It's also worth noting that President Donald Trump is making noises to the effect that he wants to see a ceasefire come about between Israel and Hamas inside the Gaza Strip. He was asked by a member of the press pack in the United States how firm he's going to be with Prime Minister Netanyahu when Bibi visits the White House next week on the issue of a ceasefire in Gaza. And President Trump responded that he will be very firm, but he went on to say that he doesn't necessarily feel it's required for him to be so firm, because he believes Prime Minister Netanyahu wants a ceasefire as well. One last thing on this issue. There is a lot of talk about what President Trump wants in terms of a ceasefire. There's a lot of talk about what Prime Minister Netanyahu wants on the very same subject. People seem to willfully forget the fact that the enemy has a say, and Hamas remains an obdurate, recalcitrant jihadist organization that is hell-bent on ensuring its own survival, and key to that survival is the retention of our hostages. there inside Gaza. So Hamas may say yes, Hamas may say no, and it will be based on that decision that we become aware of whether this ceasefire will be broken successfully or not. Well, the State of Israel defined three objectives, not all at once, incidentally, in the wake of the October 7th attack. The first objective was the return of all of our hostages, both the living and the dead. That has not yet been achieved, and until that has been achieved, I don't think it will be possible for the Prime Minister to sell the notion of victory to the Israeli populace. We have a majority of the hostages that have been returned, both the living and the dead. It's worth remembering that several of those who have returned to us in body bags were killed inside the Gaza Strip, having been kidnapped alive. But I don't think that Prime Minister Netanyahu will be able to, as I say, sell to the Israeli public that victory has been achieved inside the Gaza Strip in the absence of the return of every last one of our hostages. The second war aim was the complete toppling and destruction of Hamas as a terror army, a force, an administration inside the Gaza Strip. That also has not yet been fully achieved, but we have certainly broken apart their ability to operate as a functioning terror army. Out of their 24 battalions, at least 20 have been destroyed. And as I say, they've been reduced from a functioning terror army with a clear command and control structure to little more than a guerrilla force. And the third goal of the war that was sought was to ensure that Hamas never again could constitute itself as a threat against the citizens of the State of Israel. I personally believe that as long as Hamas remains in situ as the leading regime inside the Gaza Strip, we merely await the next time that Hamas will launch some sort of attack against our citizens. So I don't think that anybody can declare that all of the war aims have been reached, but I do think severe damage has been dealt to Hamas as a terror army. I do think many of our hostages have been brought home, and we must bring all of the remaining hostages home, those who are alive and those who are no longer alive. And I also do think that we've severely, severely damaged the ability of Hamas to constitute a threat to the people of Israel ever again. But you leave them alive, you leave that threat alive. I think Piers Morgan's suggestion that the Israelis and the IDF are prohibiting the entry of the international press into the Gaza Strip because we don't want the world to see what has taken place inside Gaza. You have to ask, from where is he drawing that conclusion? And the answer is he's drawing it from images that are in the media, throughout the international media, that have come from the Gaza Strip, very, very often without context, very, very often in the absence of the relevant information. But nonetheless, it's quite clear that Piers Morgan is availing himself of reports, images, videos coming from the Gaza Strip delivered to his cell phone by way of media reporting. So the notion that the media is not inside the Gaza Strip is completely, totally and utterly flawed. And if that is not the case, then one would have to conclude that Piers Morgan is condemning the actions of the IDF based on no information whatsoever. Now, Piers Morgan goes on to say that when Israel expresses, rightly so, that it doesn't want the international media running around a live and active war zone because that endangers and imperils the very lives of those journalists, he says, well, Israel has no right to make that decision. The individual media outlets will assume responsibility for the fate of the journalists that they send to the Gaza Strip. Now, international media sent to the Gaza Strip under the Piers Morgan plan would by definition have international passports, have citizenships of other countries. They would be in a hot war zone, and were they to fall in the course of their reporting, we would see an avalanche of international criticism against us. Israel is involved in a war. It has many dimensions to it. One of those obvious dimensions is the kinetic aspect. but it's also an information war. And we are losing that war. And part of the reason that we are doing so is that the international media is proving itself time and again to be a bad actor when it comes to reporting about what's actually taking place inside the Gaza Strip. I don't think that anybody should reasonably expect that Israel, our government, and our military should lay ourselves exposed to bringing in representatives of international media outlets that have shown themselves to be bad actors. We're already on the back foot in the information war. It's not because we are acting in a manner that is inappropriate inside the Gaza Strip. It's because the media outlets have proven themselves time and time again to be bad faith actors. Piers Morgan knows that, and Piers Morgan seeks to capitalize upon that, cynically so. Sean Parnell, who is a spokesperson for the Pentagon, expressed to the media that the assessment of the Pentagon is that the US strikes on the Iranian nuclear facilities have set back the Iranian nuclear program by up to 2 years. It's also worth looking back on what happens when nuclear weapons programs are impeded, knocked back, rolled back, or even destroyed. In 1981, Israel launched a strike against the Iraqi nuclear weapons program. It took time, and it took world events, and it took domestic events in Iraq, but ultimately, in the absence of having a nuclear weapons program, the regime of Saddam Hussein fell. The similar thing can be seen with regard to Syria's nuclear weapons program. In 2007, the state of Israel destroyed Syria's nuclear weapons program. That was being helmed by Bashar al-Assad. And in the years between 2007 and 2024, the regime in Syria, in the absence of a nuclear weapons capability, lurched into massive instability to the point where the regime fell, and Bashar al-Assad is now essentially a refugee in Russia. And also in Libya in 2003, not by way of a military campaign, but by way of diplomatic agreement, Gaddafi decided that he would disarm his program of weapons of mass destruction, including his nuclear weapons program. And in 2011, Gaddafi ultimately was killed by a mob of his own people inside Libya. So what I want to demonstrate is that regimes that do not have nuclear weapons capabilities, ultimately those regimes fall. Now, to come to the Iranian issue, assuming that the program has been rolled back by 2 years, what has been advanced and accelerated has been unhappiness, dissatisfaction, opposition within Iran towards the regime of the Ayatollahs. If that can be fomented, if that can be harnessed, if that can be deployed, you may well see the end goal that I would like to see come about, namely the toppling of the Khamenei regime and regime change inside Iran. And during the course of the 2 years by which the nuclear weapons program is said to have been rolled back, I would like to see the Iranian people rise up and vomit out from within their midst this cruel, oppressive leadership that has shown itself to be pursuing a nuclear weapons program to the great detriment, not only of Iran writ large, but also to the Iranian people. So that 2 years gives us actually, in the Middle East, a great deal of time to play with. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and make sure you check out the MirYam Institute YouTube channel, where you'll find more analysis, podcasts, and incredible footage. If you want to see our very latest content, don't forget to hit the subscribe button so that you'll get all of the relevant notifications. And we very much want to know what you think, and we want to hear the questions that you want answered. So please let us know in the comments. See you next time, and be sure to share this content with your network.